When you look at a painting, when any of us look at paintings, especially a picture that shows some realistic or representational subject, something you can easily identify, most of us have no problems enjoying and understanding art. Most of us know what we like. At least we know what we feel comfortable with. Often it's some easily recognizable subject. Something familiar. Maybe related to a special interest. Perhaps a landscape of a familiar place that serves as a memory device. Something that will trigger our recollections. A time of day. A time of year. A season. We all respond to the immediate decorative quality of flowers. Or a still life in which objects have been skillfully manipulated into an arresting composition. There are certain paintings and certain painters who have such a universal appeal that almost everybody enjoys their work. These are the masters. The intriguing thing about paintings by such masters is that everyone seems to like them for different reasons. Oh yes, there's a universal ingredient in them that reaches out to everyone. The children of Mary Cassatt. The bold stabs of Van Gogh. The powerful darks and lights of Rembrandt. The sheer virtuosity of Da Vinci. Yes, the great masters have a universal appeal. But although each one of us is attracted to such works of art, most of us like them for different reasons. The subject. The color. The light. The line. Certain shapes. The composition. The story. Or even the message. But there's a problem with great works of art. Many of us will acknowledge that a given painting is a masterpiece. Especially if it's a world-famous painting by an old master. Yes, we'll say, it's a masterpiece. But to ourselves, we might say something like, well, I know it's a great work of art, but I don't like it. We'll say that to ourselves, but seldom aloud to anyone else. And that's where everything usually stops. We know what we like. The best way to understand art and to develop your appreciation of art is to see a lot of it. Appreciating painting is just like anything else. We build on experience. We're going to give you some experience by showing you a lot of paintings. We hope you like a few of them. Let's talk about the artist first. The representational artist doesn't try to fool you. But sometimes the images presented help us to realize that the line between art and life is not always clear and simple. The contemporary painter continues a long tradition in works such as these, where he asks the viewer to believe that the flat surface of the painting is not canvas, but space. Trompe-l'oeil. That's French for fool the eye. Painters have been doing this type of painting for centuries. These contemporary trompe-l'oeil paintings are called photorealism. And they're impressive examples of virtuoso technique. They're popular because we can all recognize the artist's skill in creating such images. The artist has learned his craft well. But this skill is only a means to an end. The ability to handle paint like this is not a lot different from the way we use words, sentence structure, and syntax to express ourselves. Craft, along with the elements of art, line, color, form, shape, light and shade, composition. This is the vocabulary the artist uses. The painting is a statement, the expression of the concept or idea. It can be as simple as a sentence, a paragraph, an entire book, an epic, a protest, a prayer, a song. But first and above all else, a painting is a visual experience for both you, the viewer, and the artist. Let's see how we, the viewers, actually look at a painting. We'll examine our physical reaction. This painting, called Christina's World, was painted by Andrew Wyeth. Look at it. How do you see it? Generally, we take in the entire canvas with our first glance. We identify the subject matter. And at this point, we can either accept it or reject it. Remember, we know what we like. After grasping the whole painting, our eyes begin to move about the canvas. As you look at this painting, notice how your eyes move from one part to another. Most of us would start with the figure of the girl, Christina, the title. Then, we'd move into Christina's world, following her line of sight to the distant house. Perhaps linger on the house for a moment. Then we'd move back across the horizon to the outbuilding. Now, notice here how the artist leads your eye back towards Christina along the curve indicating the separation between the cut and the uncut grass in the field. At this point, we might take in the whole picture once more. Then, re-explore particular details. The small buildings beyond the house. The texture of the barn. The quality of the grassy field. Details of clothing. The girl's hair. Now, because this is a highly realistic work, we might begin to try to put the elements together. Try to find the story the artist is telling. You can't get all this from the picture alone. You wouldn't know the details of the event that inspired Andrew Wyeth to paint this picture. But you do get a sense of his message. The artist has captured your attention, engaged your interest, and provided you with clues, but no words. Nothing verbal for you to latch onto. He forces you, in a sense, to have a purely visual experience. Let's look at another painting. This painting by Paul Jenkins, painted in the mid-60s, is pure abstraction. Look at it and try to become aware of how your eyes move. First, you take in the entire work. Then, as with the Wyeth, your eyes begin to wander. You begin to explore the colors and abstract forms. Now, as you view the work, notice that even though there's a strong set of diagonal shapes, your eye never wanders beyond the edge of the canvas. You stay within the work. The same thing happens when you look at this painting by Jackson Pollock. Your eye moves around the painting, but never wanders beyond the edges. How does the artist do this? What elements in a painting, any painting, abstract or representational, what elements does the artist use to achieve this effect? Artists use line, color, form, shape, light and shade, as well as pattern and texture to control and create the composition, the design of a canvas. In this painting by Fra Angelico, painted in the 15th century, the entire composition is dominated by bold, simple, flat patterns. A simple, clearly drawn line defines the figures. Very little light and shade is used to describe form. The colors are strong. In this painting by Leonardo da Vinci, strong lights and darks highlight the subject to create a bold feeling of three dimensions. The overall triangular shape of the composition gives a feeling of stability. The repeated arches in the background keep your eye from leaving the picture. These two paintings, though similar in subject, are strikingly different. Fra Angelico emphasized line and pattern and used light and shade sparingly. Da Vinci did just the opposite. Different artists, using the same elements of design, emphasized them differently, yet each achieved the same sense of serenity and peace. Part of this can be explained by the similar use of repetition in the arches. Repetition is an important element of design. In this painting by Diego Velázquez, the use of repetition is obvious. The many lances are used to stabilize the action of the figures. But more design elements are at work. Smoke rises from distant campfires to create an angle. The poses of the central figures create another set of angles. The checkered banners, all are strong diagonals. The lance carried by the figure in the left foreground. The arm of the boy in white. The sash of the central figure and the neck of the horse all provide counterbalancing diagonals. So the elements of line and shape are repeated. Patterns are created. Colors and tones are varied. These design concepts, developed during the Renaissance, were used as basic tools by generations of artists in creating storytelling pictures. But they have also been used by purely abstract painters to induce the same type of response from the viewer, a vigorous but controlled composition. When looking at a portrait painting, we might think that many elements of design were omitted, especially when we're presented with a simple head and shoulder view. The great masters often created compositions of great simplicity. A profile view presents the most easily identifiable aspect of the human face, and when combined with a flat background, limits space, forcing the viewer to concentrate on the face. But even in such simple compositions, notice how your eye moves from one shape to another, even though it's now limited almost exclusively to the head. In Rembrandt's portraits, the triangular design, so natural in portraiture, is given additional animation by the skillful use of an almost theatrical light. Drama, in an otherwise static composition, is created by the contrast of strong lights and darks. This use of light and shade, called chiaroscuro, first explored in the late Renaissance, gradually replaced the simple lines and shapes used by Fra Angelico and others a few centuries before. In El Greco's famous View of Toledo, the charged atmospheric drama itself became the subject of the painting. Here, you also see a dynamic use of pattern as a design element, along with light and shade. Francisco Goya was among the first to use light and dark to create what he considered a realistic effect in presenting a controversial political subject. This is perhaps one of the first examples of protest art. The artist's choice of subject matter gives us a good clue to the period in which a painting was created. And since much art was either commissioned or purchased by the wealthy and upper social classes, the subject of paintings often reflect their taste. Throughout the history of Western painting, there has been an almost continuous and close relationship between the artist and the patron. At first, it was the church, and subjects were mainly religious. Even during the Renaissance, when the rediscovery of classical art brought the nude back into art, the overall theme and context remained essentially religious. As the power of the states increased, kings and local powers became the patrons of art, and the subject of painting became more and more secular. The paintings of the French court give us a beautiful set of excellent examples of the artist and his patron in perfect harmony. Delicate, fragile, and artificial, these wonderful decorative paintings masterfully capture the frivolous attitude of their time. revolutions and upheavals brought new social classes to power and new patrons for the arts. The rise of the merchant and middle class introduced new themes and, once again, new benefactors for artists. Industrialization and growing international trade, expanding business, the growth of financial markets created new millionaires, and their patronage supported new art and new subject matter. In America, the land itself became a dominant theme as artists followed explorers into the unknown Western territories. As the pace of life picked up, the rate of change also accelerated within the field of painting. Innovations and new inventions altered the structure of society, and some had a profound effect on the arts. The camera, for example, with its ability to quickly capture a glimpse of life, had a significant effect on the composition of such artists as Edgar Degas. Would these candid views of life have been possible without the invention of the camera? Of course, art itself often provided the inspiration for change. And many artists claim that art, not life, is the real subject of art. In the development of French 19th century art, we can observe a new way of seeing both art and the world. We can see it emerge as we move from one generation to another. The younger artists taking from their elders, but adding new ingredients, new vision, not only new subjects, but new ways of handling the basic elements of art. Gustave Courbet in the 19th century sought to create a sense of realism when he painted ordinary subjects. Edouard Manet began by trying to do the same thing, but greatly simplified the forms. Degas used the reality provided by the candid photograph, but created impressions of scenes because of the broken brushstrokes of his technique. Claude Monet went even further. Vincent van Gogh added his tormented imagery. Paul Gauguin flattened the image and stressed strong color patterns. Henri Matisse took Gauguin's lead, but added a more decorative element, and eventually arrived at an almost pure abstraction. American artists learned from the French. When Marcel Duchamp's nude Descending a Staircase was exhibited in America in 1913, artists who had been taking their cues from the Impressionists suddenly began to experiment with abstraction. During both World Wars, European artists came to America, and the cross-fertilization of ideas and new visual perceptions accelerated. By the 50s, America had become the center of the art world. And it was in New York City that new styles were born. New techniques of applying paint to canvas were tried. A time arrived when figurative or representational painting was almost entirely neglected in favor of the new abstract expressionism. And around this time, big corporations became the major patrons. Then came pop art, and another swing of the pendulum of taste. The new American realism, or superrealism, developed out of, and in a sense, in reaction to pop art. And it was abstraction's turn to take a back seat. Taste changes. Maybe when we approach a painting, we should say, I know what I like today. Change in art, in society, and in ourselves. That's also an ingredient in art appreciation. Now, when we look at all these different paintings, there's a tendency to be overwhelmed. They all seem so different. Some only slightly so. Others radically different. But they all have many things in common. Look at one. Try to notice how your eye moves around the painting. It moves in a certain way, following a path set out for you, the viewer, by the artist. That particular design, that composition, are the mechanics that help set the mood, give a pace to your visual response. Your visual response then triggers another set of responses, emotional, spiritual, call it what you wish. It's the message that the artist has for the world. The message may be simple and specific, something like, this is a beautiful day. It may be simply that this color and this shape is appealing to me, and I submit it for your inspection and appreciation or pleasure. No matter what style, no matter what era a work of art has been created in, the elements remain surprisingly similar and simple. In representational painting, we can easily see how the artist uses line, form, shape, color, light and shade, pattern, and texture. You can see how repetition and variety, a major center of interest and minor characters, play their part in not only the drama of the subject, but also in the mechanics of the composition. In abstract art, an element of confusion confronts some viewers when the artist limits the elements he uses. Joseph Alper's primary concern was with color. Light and shade exist only as degrees of difference between a limited selection of colors. The shapes merely define color changes. Stuart Davis also limits color, but incorporates recognizable shapes that introduce a story element. Andy Warhol minimizes the storytelling element to stress the poster-like presentation of raw color and forms modified by a high-contrast photographic technique. Andrew Wyeth built a private world with tiny brushstrokes laid down on the surface of the canvas with the consummate craftsmanship of an old master. An artist like Don Eddy uses an airbrush to present the highly polished finish of slick automobile advertisements. The subject of the photorealists is actually a photograph of what we think the main subject is. As real as these images appear, no artist can create a painting that's not at first an abstract painting. He may select a subject that's recognizable, but he still organizes his material and designs the composition to lead the eye of the viewer around the painting in a particular way. The images that abstract artists create don't have to look like anything we'd recognize. But they do use and emphasize elements of color, line, form, and so forth that exist in reality. These elements are then accentuated, rather than the literal and identifiable forms of the subject. You can see this in the works of Charles Sheeler. In the paintings of an artist like Picasso, you are exposed to an entire range of pictorial treatments from purely traditional representation to a high degree of abstraction. The range of Picasso's work is so broad that you could almost say that interpretation of the subject was itself an element of art. In this painting, Three Musicians, Picasso stressed flat pattern and created a very shallow sense of space. His colors are bold, and there's little gradation of tone. Picasso, more than any other artist, consistently changed his style in his search for original visual forms. Other artists strive for a more consistent image. Juan Miro used the same type of free form throughout most of his life. Such shapes have been dubbed biomorphic because they suggest biological objects. Arshile Gorky, in the 50s and 60s, used the same concept in his paintings. But in these works, you can sense that his source of inspiration was in flower and insect forms. In the works of Willem de Kooning, biomorphic forms relate specifically to the human figure. Although he also painted pure abstractions with great slashing strokes, almost as though he was canceling out any suggestion of a recognizable subject. This painting by Franz Klein has a very similar feeling, but he limited his palette almost exclusively to black and white. Frank Stella's early works emphasize geometric forms, as simple and massive as Klein's, but now with a precise, sharp edge. In the works of Mark Rothko, we see a poetic limitation of shapes. Here, everything is simplified in the service of color and a very delicate sense of space. Clyfford Still gives the concept of space a more energetic feeling. This is partly due to his fascination with the texture of the brushstroke. Some contemporary paintings are extremely large, and it's important to realize what part size and scale play in our response to a given painting. What may seem to be a simple concept in a reproduction becomes an entirely different experience when the original is seen. Today, artists work in a wide range of styles. Each artist independently trying to find a visual form that will best express what they want to say about themselves, about life and their experience, as well as about art itself. Hard-edge abstractionists work with a limited vocabulary of forms and frequently stress pure color relationships. Others try to directly impact your optical nerve. Artists like Victor Vasarely take advantage of the physical properties of color to create space. Cool colors, like blues and greens, seem to recede away from the viewer. Warm colors, like reds and yellows, seem to advance. By carefully relating these properties of color, the artist can manipulate our sense of space within a canvas. Abstract art is often compared with music. Just as the sound of music doesn't relate to anything you've heard, so non-representational painting doesn't relate to any particular thing you've seen. But that doesn't mean you haven't shared a similar visual experience. How many times have you responded to the simple beauty of extreme close-up photography, and maybe even been disappointed when you realized that the image was really part of something else? How about the visual sense of time and movement you experience when traveling in a car, on a train, or in a plane? Think about some of your own abstract visual experiences. When you look at a painting, you become involved in a physical process that begins in the eye. You react to color, to forms and shapes, to a sense of light and dark. Your eye moves through the painting, exploring images. The artist may use all the elements of design, or only a few. His or her purpose is always the same: to engage your vision so that he or she can engage your mind, your emotions, your heart.